Hello and welcome to the Peaceful Empowerment Work Show. We are live on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. I am your co-host Judy Forder, and I am here with my co-host in peace, Miss
Kris Burke. Hi, everybody. Hi,
Hi.
Judy.
Hello, Kris. We are here for the fourth part 4 of our 4-part series for teachers, How to Cut Chaos in the Classroom today. We have talked about an awful lot of things over the past 3 weeks. If you've been watching the series, you've seen how working through school-based trauma has been helpful for me. So selfishly, hey teachers, thanks. And today we really want to leave you with some concrete things. So we're going to start with Kris. Kris has beautiful words for you to hear before we embark on the rest of the show today.
Yeah. So you know what? Let me just read something that I wrote because I don't have it committed to memory, and it does seem to say it really well. So first of all, you are not your behaviors, right? What you do, that's not who you are. What you think and what you feel, not who you are, right? You are the spark of consciousness or awareness that observes and experiences the processes that occur within and without as you make the journey from unconscious to conscious, from random to purposeful, from lost to found. Right? We're all making the journey home back to that state of unconditional love. Unconditional love and acceptance for ourselves, unconditional love and acceptance for our fellow travelers, both, I like to say the two-legged and the four-legged, for those of us who have a lot of four-legged friends and family members. Yeah, but this was such an important piece of my journey in the very beginning. I actually got this, this download, this ping of like, you are not your behaviors. Separate yourself from your behaviors. And at the time that I heard that, I was like, I think that sounds kind of profound and really good, but I have no idea what that means. And I have no idea how to go about that process because at that time, I had a lifetime of experience that I had rated pretty much every experience on a daily basis, everything I did. My behaviors, everything I said, everything I did, I rated as good or bad. And I kept a pretty serious tally of how I was doing, what was good about me. And that list somehow hadn't grown very significantly. And also a list of all the things that were wrong with me, all the things I'd done wrong, all the mistakes I'd made, all the regrets that I had, all of the ways that I'd been hurt, right? I had all of these lists of all of these things. And I thought that I was absolutely convinced that I was that person who had done those things and now carried, this heavy burden, right? Or I was the person that these other people had done these things to, and I now carried that heavy burden. And what I came to learn over time was I was the person who could have an experience and say, wow, that didn't feel good at all. I'm going to try something different.
Yeah. You were experimenting and exploring the entire time, yet not giving yourself the grace of, I don't even like to call them mistakes or failures, learning opportunities. You either win or you learn. And that's winning.
Yeah. And it doesn't seem that way. I mean, I want to be clear, like at the time, I was convinced that I had made mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand that I had just been resistant to learning to adjust and change.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when something happened and I didn't feel good about it, I would hold myself and other people accountable. And then I would hold us accountable. Right. I would hold us in those patterns. It was like, I am this person that this happens to. I am this person that did these things. I didn't allow myself, was not able also to
Mm-hmm.
see myself as somebody who learned something like, oh, you didn't like that experience. You didn't like the way saying that or doing that felt, or you didn't like the way that person's treatment of you made you feel. All I had, all I needed to know was to recognize, yeah, I don't really, that's not for me. Okay, what else could I do? How could I do this differently? And we could move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've talked a lot about, that is helping to identify what's working for you and what isn't working for you. This is what works. This isn't what works. What can I do to shift some of these things? Sometimes it's just a very little tweak,
Yeah.
you know? And what we're talking about today is awareness, and you being aware of the fact that, that tally sheet of wins and losses and failures and this and that baggage of burdens that you've been hauling around, that's not you. It's not you.
Mm-mm.
To your core, we're all born into this world in this beautiful energy of unconditional love. And then all this shit is piled on us, all these beliefs, all these things. And then, we at some point, if you're watching the show, you've hit it. At some point we realize this isn't working. This isn't working for me anymore. And we start to peel the layers with awareness. Awareness is key.
Mm-hmm.
So being aware of the fact that you are not the burdens that you lug around in the bag invites you to let that bag go.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's say I used to drink. And when I was drinking, there's the old saying, if you read The Little Prince, right? The book The Little Prince, and the little boy says to the guy who lives alone on a planet, he's a drunk. And he says to him, why do you drink? And he says, because I'm ashamed. And he says, why are you ashamed? And he said, because I drink.
Mhm.
Right? This is the same kind of thing that happens with our patterns. It doesn't have to be a, addiction. But the
Mm-mm.
same kind of thing that happens with our patterns is that something happens, we do something and we're like, oh, I did this thing. And then we feel ashamed of the fact that we did that, which actually locks us in to the energy of that pattern. We are likely to repeat that pattern simply because we attach to it emotionally. We attached ourselves to it. We looked at a pattern and we said, yep, that's me.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas what we're suggesting is that as we go through, we could say, now that with consciousness, with awareness that we did not have before, so we were not able to do it, we can now say, wow, that doesn't feel good. I don't choose that. I'm going to let that go. I'm not going to hold things that don't feel good, ideas that don't feel good, feelings that don't feel good, memories that don't feel good. I'm not going to hold them as if they're precious
Right.
because they make me hurt and they make it impossible for me to love who I am and frankly to love the other people that you want to love in that unconditionally heart open way that we all long to do.
Boom. Boom. And I'm hearing, okay, what's this got to do with teachers? It has everything to do with teachers because, and this is going to get a big head on you. Everybody is a teacher and everybody is a student.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this 4-part series has been geared toward teachers in a classroom. Okay. But this awareness is for everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. So, teachers, when you can walk into a classroom and understand and feel the difference between you and the energy you show up in versus the energy of the kids in the class, the collective, then you know where you're starting. Because if you're feeling anxious, upset, chaotic, your kids are feeling the same way. So we're going to talk more about, we're going to bring up the map and we're going to talk more about the zones. Because if you can be aware of what zone you're in, then you can make the choice to do what you can do to elevate your zone, climb into zone 2, zone 3, before walking into the classroom. And then when you're in that higher zone, you invite the children to come in with you. You having the awareness of where you are, inviting the children to have an awareness where they are, shifts everything.
Yeah.
Because it's no longer you versus them. It's collectively, you're speaking the truth of something doesn't feel right here. What can we do so that we can all feel safe, supported, and seen?
Yeah. The classroom of kids that you have in front of you that behaves the way they behave, they're telling you which zone they're in and how they have learned personally through observation and experience, how they have learned to survive in that zone. Right. And I'm making an assumption here that most of the children that you're interacting with are in zones 1 or 2 most of the time, because that is kind of the state of our world at the moment.
Mhm.
That we've, that there's a lot of fear. That's what we hear people talk about. That's what's kind of broadcast all the time. It's like, this is scary, that's scary, everything's scary. There's no safe place. And that's what we're all being subjected to. Just the reality of our world right now. So the kids are feeling that, and we adults are working and sometimes struggling to deal with these changes in our reality, which puts us in that zone 1 or zone 2 state. And the kids are picking that up and observing it and looking for that safe place in the adults. And until we have the safe place, right, how can we provide it for anybody else?
Right. And that, that fear anxiety line that they're showing you right between zone 1 and zone 2. That's where a lot of people are living. And they're floating back and forth between the two. And the fear and anxiety shows in very different ways. And that's something not only in the teachers, but in the students. You'll have students that will act out and be disruptive. They're physically expressing that fear and anxiety that they're showing. Teachers, if you're hyper focused, if you are the overachiever, Kris can relate with this. Being the overachiever, that's another way anxiety plays out. Because you're so afraid of letting someone down or letting yourself down that you're constantly pushing yourself.
Yeah.
So,
perfectionism is a trauma response.
yeah. So it shows in different ways. That kid that sits in class and doesn't say anything and always listens and does their homework and, does great on tests, but gets so nervous and worked up. That's anxiety. And Kris, it's a trauma response. And I don't like to talk in 100%, but I feel it is safe for us to say that 100% of the people on this planet have been traumatized.
Very, very close. Yeah.
And it plays out differently for everyone. So we have said in previous shows that if those kids are in zone 1 and zone 2, zone 1 is survival. They're not going to be able to learn. The mind can't learn anything new when all its focus is surviving. So we first need to be able to identify that that's where we are.
Right.
And then what? Once we identify it, Kris, what do we do?
Well, then we set the intention of getting into the zone that feels better, right? We explore and experiment with what are my other options? Where else could I be? And one of the things that we like to do is we like to go to zone 3. Zone 3 is a great place to start, where we just get present. I say just, there is no just. Where we stop trying so hard, where we stop needing to have the answers, where we stop trying to figure it out based on past experiences and past information that led us to where we are, right? We want something new. If we want a new experience, we need to bring in new energy, new ideas, new approaches, right? And we don't have them, because if we did, we would have used them. We've been struggling. We've been trying. We've done what we knew how to do, right? So good for us. And then we look at, how do I get into zone 3? Why? Because when we're in zone 3, this is where ideas pop in.
Mhm.
This is where new approaches can come, where all of a sudden you're like, I don't know. I almost feel like today the kids just need to draw, and your zone 2, your intellect that needs to be in control and needs to be right, needs to be doing the right thing immediately, like, oh, that's terrible, may argue with that. But if we can be in zone 3 and allow ourselves, like, I don't know, what would happen? What would happen if we just said to the kids, I feel like we're all a little frazzled. I feel like we've been working really hard just to maintain sort of navigating the world lately. What do you say we take a day and we just relax our minds and allow our creativity to flow? See what happens. Right? And I will tell you, and I'm sure part of the reason Judy is giggling, and we'll ask her for sure, but I just imagine that, yes, some of the kids are going to become smart asses,
Mhm.
right? But you know why? Because they're going to feel vulnerable.
Mhm.
Because they're not used to people saying, I want you to feel good, and I'm going to create the conditions where that can happen today.
Yeah.
They're not used to talking about feelings. They're not used to vulnerability. They're not used to adults like dropping the mask of authority and just saying the truth
Being
of
real.
what they're thinking and feeling, of being real. They're
Yes.
not used to it. It's going to scare them a little bit. It's going to make them feel a little vulnerable because they know how to deal with adults that are wearing masks.
Mhm.
They've learned how to shut down, how to be quiet, how to be reactive, how to yell back. They've learned how to deal with the actor adult, with those behaviors in zone 1 and zone 2, but they don't know how yet to sit down and drop their own mask and just be real with the people in the environment, because
Yeah.
that hasn't been safe.
No. And that's why, the first time, if you're not in zone 3, you can't get anybody else there either.
Mm-mm.
Because you set the environment.
Yeah.
So if you're still in zone 1 and zone 2, it can't be like, hey, let's see what we can do, because that, you know, um, Kris laughs at me because I've been watching this show. She doesn't really laugh; she's supportive. But I've been watching this show on Gaia called Rewire
Mm.
with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he talks about how by the time we're 35 years old, all that automatic programming, we live in it. It's all in our subconscious,
Hmm.
all in the subconscious. 5% of our brain works in the conscious world. So we're running these patterns. We're running these patterns. We're running these patterns. And when we try to do something new, the conscious mind is working, but the body is still running the unconscious pattern. So when something's different, our physical body gets thrown into fight or flight.
Right.
So we're saying these things. We know they're not easy. I had that quote about repetition, 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 repetition. It takes repetition to change that established subconscious rewiring. And the first step is to be aware of it.
Hmm.
Notice the patterns. So if you can notice the patterns in yourself, you start to notice the patterns in not only your students, but the people around you.
Right.
And when you can notice the pattern, then you can make the choice. And then we're not talking about walking in your classroom and blowing everything up that the kids know, because consistency is important. Consistency is important in people feeling safe. We're saying small, subtle changes. Small, subtle changes you make within yourself and in your classroom environment where you're feeling safe, it invites the children to feel safe.
Hmm.
Okay? Because the small, subtle changes doesn't throw your body into fight or flight.
Right.
So there is no fight for change. We don't fight change, we embrace, we invite change.
Yeah. And when people can feel that energy, when you relax and you're real and you're inviting a different experience and you're open to a different experience and you're asking for internal guidance, internal hints, what should I do? And you're also noticing. I mean, notice what's going on. right? Just be the observer. Don't need so much to dictate or guide or steer what happens. And I know very much what I'm talking about because I was very much somebody who I led project implementations, right, in big companies. And so that was my job, was to go in and kind of get my arms around the cats, herding the cats, as they say, and get everybody going in the same direction. And so that was something that I got, rewarded for doing and was appreciated. When I started working with my horses and wanting to connect with them, I could get them to do things, but I couldn't get them to like me. Right? I feel like teachers are going to be like, right? Because I didn't just want my horses to do what I told them to do. I wanted them to want to. I wanted them to want to connect with me and to do the things. And I have mares, all female horses, and everybody knows mares are kind of known for being more emotional and more transparent about their emotions. Not all the time, but I was getting the middle hoof a lot. Let's just say that, like they'd pin their ears back and they'd be like, "Fine, I'll do it, but man,
Like,
someday I'm going to look for an opportunity to knock you into the next universe because you're a pain in my tail," right? So I just didn't like the feeling of our being together. It just wasn't like when I was a kid and I had horses and we were besties, right? That wasn't happening. And what I learned was, because my zone 2 person, my in control person, had built so big in order to navigate the adult life and the roles that I had, and to give me a sense of safety, and also to do the jobs that I was doing, was the only way I knew how to approach it. That I was no longer somebody that a horse wanted to connect with. There was nothing to connect to.
no,
It
and they
was
didn't.
just rules.
Yeah, they didn't trust you.
They did not trust me.
The rules could change at any time. You were the one
That's
in.
right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And I wasn't asking them for their input. I wasn't taking into consideration what mood they seemed to be in today. Right? I was just showing up at the barn saying, "Hey, great news. I'm here and this is what we're going to do." Right? And so when I feel that energy, it really helped me as I learned, and it took time and years. It took me years. As I changed and I started to see, wow, I have a completely different relationship with my horses and myself and the other people in my life. Because I started saying, what do we need? What do we want? Right? It's a different energy. Zone 3 energy says what's good for us all. And it values connection. Why? Because connection is where learning happens. The best of everything, the absolute best of everything, happens when we connect and we're real with one another.
Yes. And another thing, yeah. And these kids, I don't know how many teacher friends of mine are saying it. These kids are different. The kids are coming in different. I like to laugh and say my daughter has a spot on bullshit detector.
Mhm.
She knows when I'm bullshitting. She just knows it.
Mhm.
And if that's what you're dishing out, and she's finding it at college. She's in college. She's supposed to be being taught by these wonderful professors that have all the knowledge and all this kind. She's like, "Mom, it's so much bullshit.
Mhm.
I'm pretty much teaching myself."
Mm. Yeah.
So these kids feel it. And I said before, it's like you have to be real. And if they want real,
They do.
people are thirsty, thirsty for truth.
Mhm.
And these kids, they know that something's not right. They can feel that something's not just in school, but everywhere.
Right.
They're feeling it everywhere. They just want truth and real.
Yeah.
And the fact that we have kids that so I just learned this morning, school refusal is a thing, where 2 to 5% of our kids are refusing to go to school
Hmm.
based, on anxiety and depression and all these other things. This is a symptom of it. They're refusing to go to school.
Yeah. And it's interesting because as you were talking about truth, zone two me, like in control me, would have thought truth meant I'm going to go tell them the harsh reality of it all. Right? Let me tell you, that is not the truth we're talking about because the harsh reality of it all, first of all, it's probably skewed heavily toward harshness and negativity. And also because it's out of balance, it isn't the whole truth.
Right.
Right. And so if we start giving the harsh reality, you want to know why things are bad? Let me tell you, it's because of this principal and that superintendent and these parents and the state of the world and the news program I saw this morning and all of that. And I can spew this because I used to sound like that. Okay. So if we start saying that to our kids, what we're actually doing them is giving them an unfairly negative prism to look at life through.
And
Right.
valid.
And it's, yes, and it's
Right.
going to send them to zone one, right? It's
Yeah.
going to make them afraid because who wouldn't be afraid that we're afraid of that, right?
Mhm.
So what we're actually suggesting is let's bring the truth of the good stuff. The kids know about the bad stuff. Like they know enough about that for right now. What they really need is to find out that they can be comfortable and happy in their own skin, that they have choice.
Mhm.
That they can be okay. They can even be happy when people are being a little wackadoodle-doo around them. Right? And that can be really helpful because, we're humans. And we all get a little wacky sometimes.
Mhm.
So we're never going to be, completely devoid of that. I think sometimes we think maybe we will be, or that's the goal, but rather like, can you be comfortable when people around you are clearly expressing things that are not, mainstream?
Right.
What do I mean like that? Like kids having a crying jag in the middle of a hallway in school, right? A parent pounding their fist on the table because they've just about had it. I mean, these are, when I say wackadoodle doo, you're thinking, no, those are just normal everyday things. Well, they are in a world that's a little wacky.
Mhm.
Right? But in a world where people are comfortable in their skin, where we're not so unconscious, where we're more aware of our patterns, and we're helping one another out to see our patterns and to make peace with them so that we can feel happy and healthy together. In that kind of world, those things are not everyday occurrences.
Mm.
So
No.
we're inviting that, right? I mean, this is the part of like inviting those opportunities because if you create a little safe nest in your classroom where kids can experience what it is to feel okay in their skin and then keep working with the programs that the tools, we're not the only ones,
Mm-mm.
but, if you want to know how to create a safe haven in your classroom, if that becomes your intention, I'm going to feel good and I'm going to teach these kids how to be okay as they navigate all the life's ups and downs. If that becomes your intention, the universe will roll out the red carpet to show you how and make that possible because it loves that intention because that is a love intention. That's a
Yes.
heart-centered. Yeah.
And what it's like I can hear the teacher saying, but we have curriculum to get through. Okay, so you can either continue to fight to get through that curriculum, or you can try something new. Create this safe environment within yourself and within your classroom. And when they're in that safe environment, they're not in zone one or zone two anymore.
That's
It
right.
opens their minds and the learning happens.
Yeah. Yeah. What we're teaching isn't rocket science. I mean, even rocket science isn't rocket science to a rocket scientist, right? But they're capable of learning. Kids are sponges, but they're not capable of learning when they're in a zone one or zone two. Zone two, they learn, they're good at memorizing because they're strategic. They're trying to figure out how to game the system.
Right.
right? How do I win in this system that I'm trying to figure out? That's zone 2. That's where a lot of people live,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of people with bleeding ulcers and diabetes and migraines and, all kinds of things. So we're talking about actually inviting people into that zone 3 place where they can be aware of what's going on with me and what do I know how to do to make that feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't need so and so to say the right thing to me. I don't need this person to do the right thing. And as you're going through, when they get in that place where they can be okay and you start talking about interesting things like your curriculum, those kids will absorb it. I mean, they'll engage and they'll absorb it and they'll want to take parts of it and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what happens when kids are in that zone 3 curiosity, creativity, engagement, playfulness,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And it's funny because I keep hearing the term critical mass, critical mass, critical mass, which means, when you are able to, I mean, we can't as adults learn when we're in zone 1. I remember sitting in faculty meetings and they would have a presenter come up and the first thing they would do is like, we're going to tell you how to blah, blah, blah. And I would be like, fuck you. And I'd sit there and they would talk and I wouldn't hear a daggone thing. Wah, 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 because immediately they were telling me I was doing something wrong and I'm going to tell you how to fix it. I'm like, when's the last time you were in a classroom, buddy?
That's exactly right. And you know what? I'll tell you the same thing. There was this guy I worked for, a client who I worked for many years. I did accounting and consulted to their accounting department, really. But he had a temper and he had a struggle with keeping people for employees for very long because he would inevitably erupt and the people would not be able to take the stress anymore and so they would leave, was generally what happened. And we had a great relationship. I also was not there every day, so that that also helps, right? But then I remember one day I was going over something important with him and he asked me a question and I started to think, and he started to push, like, "Blah, blah," and all of a sudden I couldn't think. But here's what's interesting. I looked up at him and I said, when you do that, when you push me, I feel right now like you have your hand around my throat and I'm pushed up against a wall. And that is not a great place for me to be able to think and come up with the right answer for you. I actually told
That's,
him, that's pretty good. That's the power of being real. Because you know what happened? He stopped
yeah.
and he never did it with me again.
What a great visual.
Isn't that a great visual? This is how I feel right now. Like you're wanting to kill me. I'm under attack and you want me to think? Because it was kind of a complicated like equity kind, and I needed to think it through and he was not going to give me the time to do it. So he threw me immediately into zone 1.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And by telling him, it's so disarming. Oh, I understand. That's why that was kind of coming through. The most disarming thing you can do with your kids, with your principal, with your spouse, with your whoever, is to tell them the truth of what your experience is. Right now, this is how I feel. And because I feel this way, all I can do is this.
Yep.
Exactly. If you want something different from me, we're going to have to create a different scenario here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with my daughter back in the day when we didn't have the zones yet because I hadn't met Kris yet. So we didn't talk in zones, which we do now, but we didn't talk in zones back then. But we did have an awareness of when we were triggered. And we made a commitment that we weren't going to agree. We weren't going to continue to engage when we were triggered. And if you've watched past show, we talked about the timeout. Well, the timeout evolved into triggered. And when we would say that, it turn, go to your corners. And then there were times where she's triggered by something else. I'm triggered by something else. And I would say it. And she would come and be like, Mom, are you okay? Do you need to, And she would say, I'm triggered. And I'd be like, baby, are you okay? Is
Yeah.
there anything I can do to support you? And it
Yeah.
really helped. I mean, I thought it was hilarious. I have 11, 12-year-old kid going around going, I'm triggered.
Right. It is, and it's such a beautiful example of how are our kids supposed to know healthy ways to process and express and make sense of their emotions as they're going through life if all of the adults around them pretend that we don't have emotions,
Yeah.
that we're totally in control all the time, that we're not feeling anything. If you have a problem, it must be you.
Yeah.
Right? Because that whole pretend, like tense robot thing of like, no, I'm fine. Nobody's buying it.
Hold it together. Hold it together. Hold it
Yeah.
together. The old
Yeah.
ways of doing things don't work anymore. They
They
don't
do
work.
not. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. That's perfect because I really wanted to recommend, if you have not read it already, this would be a great book to read in class with kids because it's one of those books that like has multiple levels to it. At one level, it's a cute little book about mice and cheese. But the book is Who Moved My Cheese, right? And it's a lovely story. I actually will listen to it again. Of what happens when our world changes, when the situation changes, the dynamics change. And instead of saying, how am I going to adapt to this? We insist upon using our old patterns that used to work, and we get angry that they're not working, and we refuse to change, and we think the world's doing it to us, and we can't see that at some point it's our insistence upon holding on to the past that's not there anymore that's hurting us.
Mhm.
We don't know it, right? So, I mean, lots of people just got triggered and they're like, that's not true. And there's defensive stuff going on, right? But let's be clear that we didn't know it.
Mm-mm.
Right? It's what we learn. This is what I'm saying about when our parents and our teachers don't teach us the inside scoop, on being human. How do we manage this inside thing that's happening?
Mhm.
When they don't share that with us, how do we learn?
Right.
We observe other people and we make our best guess. And let's face it, a lot of these poor kids, just like us, not guessing super well.
Mm-mm. No, and it's funny because they just flashed me back to when I was growing up, and I know a lot of the mothers out there have done this, fathers too, but more mothers, where they would be losing their shit, and then the phone would ring, and they'd be like, "Hello." I can remember standing there going, "What? What just happened?
Yeah.
I wish I could leave and call her on the phone."
Exactly. Exactly. Who's this person? Right?
Exactly.
Mhm.
So again, it all goes back to we're just asking you to start paying attention and being aware of what you're feeling and then what your class is feeling. And this takes us right back to critical mass.
Yeah.
We talk about critical mass, and critical mass is, in the big humanity scale, it's if we can get to 51% of the people believing in the good in the world, then there can be a great shift. So if you can, it's going to slowly evolve with your children. We're not saying that you're going to go in on the first day and you're going to try this and everybody's going to be like, oh, the sky's open and the sun beams in and life is immediately different.
And it could.
it,
Like,
it could.
right? To be clear, like some
We
kids
don't know.
will feel like you just handed them a glass of water in the desert.
And that's what I'm saying. It might not hit all of them.
Yes. And
It
some
might.
kids, yes. And you won't know necessarily. It's going to be nourishing for all of them.
Mhm.
Not all of them will show signs of it immediately.
Exactly. You're planting seeds.
Yeah.
Some will grow faster than others.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just like when you're delivering your curriculum, when you're teaching them, that they all learn differently. This is the same thing. You're planting the seeds, you're creating the environment for them to grow.
Yeah. And the child that is, the children that are struggling, the children who seem angry with the world, the children who aren't getting what they need, um, they they hold great potential to be incredible leaders and teachers in the future if we can help them to find the truth of their inner brilliance and to find center, to find balance, and learn to trust in themselves. Yeah, your life is hard, but only the great have hard lives. We do. The hardness in our lives is because, you know, because we can handle it and because we have the ability to transmute it into something beautiful. The Hero's Journey in child form, another great thing to read in the classroom.
All right. We have hit the 40-minute, almost 41-minute mark.
Us going over? No.
I know. So it is time for us to wrap it up again. And again, we invite you to email us. If you have a topic you want us to dissect and work through, we'd be happy to. A situation you want us to work through, we would be happy to. Please email us at Kris@peacefulempowermentworks.org. Okay?
Yes, and Kris is Kris for those people who are driving.
Exactly. KRIS@peacefulempowermentworks.org. Thank you again for joining us. And teachers, may the odds be ever in your favor.
Yeah, and bless you for the work that you do.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Judy.
Bye, Kris.